SELSI, spoken easy language for social inclusion.
I'm going to give you an introduction here for about 15 minutes to a round table. And I will call up the participants of the round table when I have finished my introduction. And the topic for my presentation is Words Matter. We have talked about today accessible information. And the SELSI project, the spoken easy language, is a part of accessible information. But for information to be accessible, you have to be able to find it. And when you find it, you have to be able to read it. No matter if you read with your ears, your eyes, or your fingers. And when you read it, no matter in what way you're reading it, you have to be able to understand it. All these three parts has to be accomplished for information to be accessible. When it comes to understand, we have touched this several times already today. You know, the content, it has to be relevant. It has to be structured. And the language, we have to use common words. We should use easy and correct sentences. And sometimes when communication is not accessible, it is because that the information is not relevant or our frames of reference are different, or there are too many difficult and unknown words that we're using. These are all parts of the recommendation and the principles of communicating in easy language. We have also added, when it comes to choosing the words, to avoid expressions. And Sandra just said we have to be on the same page. Well, in easy language, we should not be on the same page, because that is an expression. And if you interpret the words literally, it is not understandable at all what it is to be on the same page. Or you all had to step up. Do I mean that you have to stand up and move around? No, I mean that you have to focus and perform better. Or in Swedish, we have an expression which is, if I make a straight translation to English, there is no cow on the ice. You get it, right? It means there are no problems, don't worry. One thing that we haven't covered today, and it has to do with how words matter, is that words and pictures, they communicate values. And what you're seeing right now on the screen is an illustration from a pamphlet a region in Sweden produced a couple of years ago. And the pamphlet was supposed to give information who had to run to the emergency room, and they're sitting in the emergency room, and this information should tell them what they can expect, what will happen in the emergency room. So the intentions were good, but I think the illustrations perfectly failed the message. Or I think the illustrations kind of give signals about values. On the screen you can see the doctor is portrayed as a person. The nurse is portrayed as a person. But then there is someone called undersköterska, which is someone that is not a registered nurse. She's a practical nurse, and he is just portrayed by a big hand. Doesn't even have a face. And images like this, at least for me, for myself, actually is communicating some values. Okay, those non-registered nurses or doctors, the ones that are not doctors or not registered nurses, they're not valued as highly or not as important as the rest. I can tell you it didn't take long before the region had to withdraw, to take back this pamphlet, and they could not use it anymore because the labor union and, there were so many people protesting about it. But this is an example of how actually words or values or words or pictures, they communicate values. And how words matter is the focus on this last session at this conference. And society influences the words we're using. But words also influence the society. So there is a flow back and forth. The words we use will have an impact on how we organize society and vice versa. And I'm going to take you on a historical journey. I got the assignment earlier this year from the Swedish Agency for Participation. They were responsible for a report about how the words we have used for people with disabilities, how they have been affected or a result of the society, the opinions of the society, and vice versa. And I have made a summary in easy language. And if you want to take part of that summary, you just send me an email, and there is a poster over there with my email address and everything, if you want to have this summary, which is in English. But it is the development of the words being used in Sweden. Okay? Let's start the journey. In 2,000 years ago, in ancient times, the word used was idiots. And at that time, there was no separation between the state, the government, or the church or the religion. It was we had not organized our society, and everyone who was somewhat different was called idiots. And it didn't matter who they were, if it was a physical disability or an intellectual, or if they had something in their appearance that looked different from the rest of the population, they were all classified as idiots. Very often they were outcast. People were afraid of them. It might be contagious. You might become an idiot yourself if you socialize with them. But at the same time, there were also people that believed that the idiots spoke messages from gods. So it was also important to try to understand what the people were saying. So the first words we used in Sweden were idiots. Then we described people that were different as insane and therefore not responsible for their actions. The oldest laws we have in Sweden, they specify that an insane person didn't understand better if he or she committed a crime. So the person received a milder punishment, which in a way is kind of a nice way of society to treat this person, right? But still the label was insane. About the same time as we had the first laws in Sweden, Sweden became a Christian country. And when Christianity came, people that were different were labeled sinners. And it was a good thing for a Christian person to help the sinners. So the church, they established institution to help the sinners, for them to become good Christians, but also it was good for the Christian person to do something so good. It was like a one-way, a fast ticket to heaven, kind of the mentality. Okay, if we jump forward a bit, the next word that was introduced in Sweden was fool. And a fool was a non-productive citizen. And now we're in the 17th century, like 400 years ago. And up until 300 years ago, even though we start to believe more in science, we talked about these people as fools. And to be non-productive was not a good thing. The society needed to have productive citizens. Then we moved on. And the next word that was used was retarded. And that now we're in the beginning of the 1800s, like 200 years ago. And at this time, the Swedish state started to build institutions for people who were retarded, mentally retarded, because it was really important to protect society from these people. We also, in the mid of 1800s, in 1842, Sweden got the first public school bill. It was passed in Sweden in 1842. We were the first country in the world to have a school bill where every child had the right to education. But, the retarded, we have to check if they could be educated. And we built more institutions where they should be and hopefully be educated. And if they couldn't be educated, well, there was a special part of the institution where the persons who were not possible to educate were put. Separate from the society. Society needs to be protected from these people. Then we start to talk about patients instead. A person with disability became a patient. And at the first glance, that might be something positive, but the effect of it was that the state did not look at these people as real persons. They were considered more or less to be animals. And therefore, it was easy to start treating these people with all sorts of unethical tests, medical tests, etc. And what happened here is actually a dehumanization. And I want to raise a big warning to dehumanization. Because if we dehumanize certain groups of people in the society, there are no limits to how we may act towards these people, what we could do and what we can ratify doing. And this continued throughout the next century, or the beginning of the next century, the 1900s. The word that was introduced in Sweden was retarded. an undesirable citizen. And this was the era of racial biology, of all sorts of experiments, of sterilization forced upon people that did not fit the normal criteria. And this is actually the background or the ratification the Nazis used and several other countries used and still are using. Because if you dehumanize a group, it doesn't hurt that bad to, you don't feel that bad yourself if you're doing bad things to them, right? And one part of this dehumanization, is also repetition becomes the truth. There is an expression, there is no smoke without fire. If you repeat it often enough, that someone is a fool, that someone is an idiot, etc., it's very easy for the whole society to have that attitude. But also it has an impact on the person itself. Okay, yeah, I guess I'm an idiot. I was brought up with hearing all the time that I'm a very non-practical, not a handy person. I have lots of intelligence and intellectual capacity. I did good at school, but I was taught I could not learn how to sew or, use a sewing machine or paint or wallpapering. And I believed that until I moved away from home, and I was so angry about it. So I just started doing things. And I can tell you, I'm really good at painting and construction and wallpapering. But for like 20 years, the self-image was that, oh no, I have it in my head, my sister has it in her hands. Because that was kind of the argument my parents were giving us. Okay. So repetition very easily becomes the truth. Then the next word that was introduced in Sweden, and now we're in an era in Sweden where Sweden is flourishing. It's after the Second World War, Sweden did not participate. Our country was not bombed. The industry was blooming. And we became a rich country. And therefore, we could embrace everyone. And of course, people who were disabled, which was the term we used at that time, they should get support from society. And of course, the beginning of the work with human rights also had an impact. Excuse me. In 1989, we got a new act on support and services for certain disabled persons. So disabled person was the word that we used. But then, from the year 2000, the term we have been using in Sweden is person with intellectual disability, with the same rights, which means we're talking about citizens. We're not talking about idiots, fools, retarded, sinners, etc. We're talking about citizens. And as long as we talk about citizens, we have a possibility to make a society that is inclusive, where everyone is included, because words do matter. Now I would like to welcome the panel up to the floor, and you need to bring your headsets. Okay. On the On the panel here, we have Esther from Sweden, working for the Dyslexia organization and the Aphasia organization. Yes. And then we have Nevenka from Slovenia. And she's one of the very important persons in Zavod Risa, working at the Zavod Risa. And then we have Deborah from England, from the UK, working at the King's College in London, besides other places. And we have Sandra from Portugal, and she just introduced herself. And we have Gunta from Latvia, and Gunta is the vice president of European Disability Forum and working at the Latvian Agency for Easy Language. Okay, just quickly first, any immediate reactions or comments to this presentation I have given? Do you recognize anything of this in your own countries? Sandra, will you start?
Well, I have the microphone. Yes. It's very similar of what we had in Portugal. The only thing that I would say is that we still have now in some laws some of the terms like idiot, disabled person, and so, yeah.
And Gunta, do you recognize this
I have a microphone.
development?
I have a microphone, yes, and in Latvia for a very long time we use the word invalid.
Invalid.
Yes, and then some people from UK came to Latvia and said, "Do you really think that people with disabilities are invalid?" And that's why we started to think, really, it's about it. And then we understood that maybe we need to change that. And I absolutely agree with you that words matter, because sometimes when elderly people in my country say, "I'm invalid, I need more money," instead of saying I'm a disabled person and I need to be employed. And it's always like that.
Deborah?
Yeah, it's quite political, I suppose. What names are decided by the government compared to what names people want to use themselves. Sometimes there's not an agreement. I remember when I was training, I read a very interesting book about intellectual disabilities that said that names that seem to be quite ordinary and neutral get turned into insults. So I know that does happen. So, for instance, we have this term in education, we call it special education. And now in the playground, it's an insult. Someone says, "Oh, you're a special, you're one of the specials." So, they chose this word special education because they thought it was a good name, but because of the stigma attached to needing extra support, it becomes an insult. So I think it's very hard to find a word that everyone agrees with. In the UK, we use the word learning disabilities. I don't know why the government uses that word. It's rather a strange word. People who are disabled in their learning, I don't know, that doesn't really make sense. I don't know why we use that word, but it's the one that's stuck. Perhaps because it doesn't really make sense, it's kind of okay. I don't know, we could say, purple people. I don't know, it just seems like it's kind of stuck. Some people themselves say, well, I like better learning difficulties. That's what they prefer. Some people say, oh, I heard this word mental handicap when my kids were born. I still use that word. That word's fine for me. I'm not going to argue with anyone. But I guess we just have to think about the words that people choose. That's fine. We're not going to argue, but we do have this official word, learning disabilities. That's kind of the one we're stuck with, even though It isn't a very good word. But I haven't heard anyone try and turn it into an insult. But words like retarded, that's definitely an insult, and special, that's an insult. Even the word spastic, which was just like a different word for cerebral palsy, that's also been turned into an insult. So far, learning disabilities, it hasn't been transformed yet.
Okay, Nevenka, what do you think about the words used for different disabilities in Slovene society?
Samo malo. Prvo, Ulla, ko sem te poslušala, sem se v veliko čem našla. Mislim, povedala si res, ne vem, kako bi rekla, ampak po moje me je, vse sem navajena. Jaz, ko sem se rodila, so me zdravniki kar odpisali. So rekli, da nikoli ne bom sposobna živeti zase, pa pač, da bom vse življenje en velik otrok. Pol seveda so bili tudi v šoli, pa tako so bile zasmehovanja, pa lepi komentarji, pa tako naprej, a ne. Tako da res, ne vejo, kako bi nas imenovali. Jaz bom rekla, da se veliko besed, ki se za različne oviranosti uporabljajo v Sloveniji, je neprimernih oziroma žaljivih. Ne samo, da izpadeš kot nekdo, ki nima pojma, osebi dobesedno prilepiš žig, jo popredalčkaš. In to, kakorkoli obrneš besede ali pa rečeš kako drugače, vedno ostane tista etiketa. Pa seveda predsodki, pa zastarelo mišljenje, a ne. Zdaj smo že malo bolj odprtega mišljenja, ampak vseeno, recimo, naletiš na kakšne, recimo, ko se doktorji pogovarjajo s tvojim, jaz sem bila v ustanovi, a ne, in ponavadi je bilo tako, da so se zdravniki ali pa sestra pogovarjali z spremljevalko, ko je bila z nami, mi smo bili pa tam ko neki zid, recimo, a ne. Tako da, mislim, še zdaj, a ne, ali pa, da nismo dobili informacij, vse tisti, ko bi bile pomembne za nas, pa tako, a ne. Če manj smo vedeli, veliko boljše je bilo, manj problemov, a ne. Zato so tudi informacije zelo pomembne, bom rekla.
Okay, what would you like people to call you? What word do you want other people to use?
Za poimenovanje, recimo. No. V prvi vrsti bi jaz želela, da ljudje dojamejo, da smo tudi mi ljudje kot drugi. Kaj meni manjka? Isto grem v trgovino, isto nakupujem, isto kuham, perem, pospravljam. Sem čisto običajna oseba, ko je na zunaj, nič ni videti. Razen če nastopi kakšna blokada pri komuniciranju, takrat pač rabim nekoga, ko mi pomaga pri določenih stvareh, ko mi kakšna stvar razloži, drugače pa sem to, kar sem. A ne, to, vsi smo, noben si ni enak, vsi smo si različni med sabo, a ne, ampak pač jaz sem vesela, da sem tako sem in konč. Če kdo tega ne more sprejeti, njegov problem, ne moj.
Yes, it's their problem, Nevenka. And Nevenka, to me, you are Nevenka. First and all, you're Nevenka.
Ja, poimenovanje, recimo, a ne. Jaz bi rekla, oseba z oviranostjo je dober izraz za imenovanje. Je spoštljiv, vsi smo ljudje in ni nikoga, ki ne bi imel kakšne ovire, take ali drugačne.
No, and there are barriers for me here in Slovenia because I don't speak Slovene. So we all of us face barriers daily, I would say, in certain extent. Esther, what about the discussions about different words being used in Sweden? I have given the historical journey, but
You told them everything already. So
yeah.
no, within the NGOs in Sweden, the NGOs in the function right movement we talk about, we have the discussion. Of course, we're talking about persons with different disabilities. So we have person with dyslexia, we have person with aphasia. We don't say dyslexic person. We don't talk about dyslexic or aphasic persons. So human first, always human first. You're mainly a person, and then secondly or thirdly or whatever, you have your reduced functions or whatever we talk about. In Sweden also we have, as I said, function rights. We talk about functions a lot. Is it like sounding strange? So the one that the National Board of Social Affairs and Health, they have a definition. They use funktionsnedsättning och funktionshinder. Funktionsnedsättning is when you have a reduced function, physical, psychological, or intellectual reduced function. And that is on an individual level, that the human's functions. But then we talk about funktionshinder. It is the hinder, the obstacles that occurs between your functions and in relation to the environment. So that's the difference. But some years ago, the disability movement in Sweden changed the name, and we talk about, the name is funktionsrätt, as the right for people with functional disabilities. And it all comes from the human right movement. It's a functional right movement in Sweden. And it's all about everyone has the right to self-determination and to full participation in the society. So that's it all about. It also turned out a word later. I think also it's from some parts of the movement, the funktionsrätts movement, that we have function variations. And that is a word which is maybe good because it tried to normalize having difficulties or disabilities. But it also kind of hides the disabilities or the problems or the difficulties you have in the society. And the consequences can be that we don't see the needs and they cut down on the services for people. So I think there is really people different opinions on this word. Some people like to use it, but other persons or a lot of people don't want to use it.
Yeah, there is a difficulty to find the words, and maybe we should skip the words altogether and just always talk about people or citizens. Gunta, I want to ask you, you are the vice president, right, for European Disability Forum. Do you discuss the words you use within the Disability Forum? Do you discuss the words you use, not only from a easy language perspective, but also for what kind of values they communicate?
Yes, of course, and of course we are using. And we are using discussion about both sides. And of course, one of the side, the general language in our community is always English. And we're starting by a lot of discussions about disabled people or people with disabilities. And if I understand right, it's still going on in UK. It's nothing changed there, but after a long discussion, we get understanding that people with disabilities sounds better than disabled people, without argue around. But if you are coming back to the more understandable texts and things about how people can do that, we are quite happy to have person with a brain injury as in our executive committee. And she's from Portugal, by the way. And all the time she's saying it's very difficult for me to understand your European jargon. You have so many small words or a combination of different letters that nobody can understand that. And it makes us thinking, okay, we can't speak like that, or we can't even read like that. We need to think not to have this European jargon, to let people understand exactly what we try to say to them. And also we are doing quite a lot with easy language. For example, all conferences or board meetings are organized in ways that we have a translation to easy language, translation of documents and so on. So people could follow and could be involved, which is even more important. Because in your perspective, in your presentation, there is one more step, CRPD, which is Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And that is a real point when I hope everything has been changed at least a bit. And now we are still changing.
Well, thank you. Sandra, you work at Inclusion Europe. How do you discuss the words there?
We have had a discussion about the term. So our official language is English. And some years ago, we had a discussion around either having intellectual disabilities or learning disabilities. And what we did is that we asked EPSA, the European Platform of Self-Advocates. So we had kind of a workshop around this. And it was kind of decided that they would prefer to go with people with intellectual disabilities. So that's what we use now. But I still think that we discuss the use of the words and the impact that they have, because it's true. It's not something that we are able to take any decisions, because it's an individual thing also. You know, people should be called by their names and not by any feature that they have or they don't have. So it's not something that it would be easy to come up with a solution. Okay, it's going to be like this and everybody is happy. I don't think that would be possible. And also, like you showed so well, it's kind of a journey. And we still have a lot, even if it's not officially, and now I'm going to speak about Portugal. Even if in official texts we have like disabled people, because we still have that in most of the times, not people with disabilities. And we have also a lot of, I don't know the word exactly how to say it in English, but it's like carrying of disability. So it's a disability carrier. And we still have that a lot in official texts. And the movement says, okay, this is so stupid. No, if I'm carrying it, it means that I can just drop it somewhere when I want to, and then I don't have it anymore. So, but they say, oh, it's not possible, because it's like we have it in the Constitution. So every legal document must be in according to what we have in the Constitution. We need to change the Constitution. So it's, well, but it's a process. And I think that for the people that are working around the disability movement, and also because of the convention, we talk about people with disabilities, and in our case, people with intellectual disabilities.
Deborah, during the lunch break, we were talking about how words can change its meaning and its value. And that is also something we have to think about when it comes to the words we are using. Do you remember what we were talking about?
I do remember it. Actually, I was going to say something a bit different, if that's okay.
That's okay.
Maybe moving a little bit away from what words we might use to talk about people who have got communication support needs, you know. So I want to go maybe back to another aspect of SELSI and spoken communication. So something about not just the choice of words, but how we arrange the words and how that can take away people's freedom to express their views or take away their choices. So this is a bit of a different topic, and I would say it comes more from my role as a practitioner, and also I support and supervise and train other practitioners and really try and get them to think about how they use spoken language with disabled people. So I'll just give you an example, and also my interest in conversation analysis. So just give you an example. If, you know, we're talking to someone and we want to offer them a choice, there's so many different ways we can do that. One thing I see quite a lot in my own work amongst practitioners, they'll say something like, so you want to go to the swimming pool tomorrow, don't you? Now, all those words are easy. All those words are easy to understand, but they set up a power relationship between the person asking the question. So if you ask the question like that, you want to go to the swimming pool, don't you? It's very hard to say no, because it's clear to the listener, whether they have intellectual disabilities or not, what is expected is yes, yes, okay, I'll go along with it, because that's kind of what you're expecting to hear. So I would say that taking the conversation a bit different, into a bit of a different area now, it's not just the kind of words that we use, but the order we use them and how we have different sorts of conversations that give people more opportunities to express their views, to say no, because that is quite hard. That's stepping outside, you know, that's making a bit of an argument. It's creating a bit of tension in a conversation. No, I don't agree with you. It's much harder to say that than, yes, I agree with you. That's fine. Yeah, I'm happy to go along with it. So maybe that's a different way of thinking, you know, going back to your topic there, Ulla, you know, words matter, not just the words we choose, but how we use them in a conversation.
In Swedish, for example, we Swedes were very polite people, you know, and very kind of humble in several ways, even though you might not interpret me as being humble. A very typical question is, can you pass me the salt? Please. Yes, I can pass it. Do you want me to pass it to you? But that sentence, that question, can you pass me the salt, implicates the question or that I'm asking, I need it, please send it to me. And that is also an example of how we arrange the words. Esther, I'm going to ask Esther first one question, and then Nevenka. But first, Esther. Do you have any experience of a word being used as has had an impact, negative or positive, within your work? Has there been any words that has been, you know, oh, this has really changed things, or this has really stopped things? When it,
Do you mean on an individual level for the people that I have met?
Yes.
Can I tell you a story about an elderly man? Sven, I met him some years ago, and he is a person with dyslexia. And he told me a story about when he went to school, and I think it was in the 50s or something. And his teacher called him dumb and educatable. How do you say that?
Uneducatable, maybe?
Uneducatable. And when they had the class in Swedish, he was sent out to shovel snow in the winter or to rake gravel path in the summertime. So he was never allowed to practice learning to read and write. But this man, he was not uneducatable. He was a smart guy, actually, but he became an electrician. He was quite successful in his work. And then in his 50s, he went back to school in adult education and learned to read and write. And he told me that the first time he read an article in a magazine, he was crying. So it was really, these words gave him so bad self-esteem, and the school didn't give him any possibility to practice learning. And that things make, the way how you treat people and the words you use have an impact on a full life for some persons. Even though he learned to read in his 50s, he had difficulties to read all the time. And of course, because he had dyslexia. But if he learned earlier, maybe his dyslexia would have not been so. So that's one example.
Nevenka, is there something, Nevenka, is there something you would like to tell us as some final words? Is there something you would tell us about the words we're using?
Ja, besedete lahko fejst dvignejo, lahko te pa fajn potovčejo. Mislim, dopolnila bi Debora. Ni pomembno je, kaj poveš, kako poveš in na kakšen način poveš. Mislim, ker recimo tisto primerjavi recimo v šoli, recimo, če bo meni kdo rekel, oziroma ne, tako bom rekla, Nevenka, sobo si pospravi, Nevenka, sobo si pospravi. Ne, Nevenka ne bo pospravila sobe. Ko bo pa Nevenko prijelo, da bo sama se lotila dela, pol ga bo. In v bistvu tudi ko ti nekoga vprašaš, recimo, da bi šla na bazen, če si to želiš, je isto, kot da pričakuješ, da bo rekel ja, a ne. Tako je velikokrat. Recimo, jaz imam osebno asistenco in imam super osebno asistentko, za katero marsikdo pravi, da me pač malo crkla, ampak ona dobro ve, da ji bom jaz sama rekla, če bom kaj potrebovala, ne bo pa ona stala meni za ritjo, pa me vsakih 10 minut spraševala, če kaj rabim. Če bom rekla, ji bom rekla, če ne bom rekla, moj problem, ne? Ne vem, drugače pa moj odnos do takih poimenovanj je ničelno toleranten. Zato, ker sem jih že velikokrat slišala, ampak zdaj imam glede tega bolj trdo kožo in se ne zmenim. Drugače pa človek, ki izjavi tako, a ne, da si idiot ali pa te zadeve, veliko pove o sebi, ne o meni. Ker lahko je govoriti ter komentirati, dokler se ne zgodi tudi tebi. Potem, mislim, tudi tebi in izkusiš na lastni koži, potem razumeš. Tak je.
Thank you, Nevenka. That is so true.
Samo malo. Dokler ti zafrkavaš druge, pa jim rečeš, da so idioti, pa da je ne vem kaj, pa še kaj lepšega, a ne, se lahko hitro vrne. Ko bo pa nekdo tebi to rekel, pol boš pa razumel, kako je bilo onemu, ko si ga ti tako lepo.
Yes. Thank you.
SELSI, spoken easy language for social inclusion. Partners are Zavod Risa, RTV Slovenija, Dyslexieverbundet, Università degli Studi di Pavia, Vieglas Valodas Agentura, Vilnius Universitetas, Vsi informacijos kaupimo ir sklaidos centras. Funded by the European Union.